I welcome you to another week of our 4.5-year verse-by-verse journey through all of God's inspired word, and invite you to open to the book of Nehemiah, where we have been studying the rebuilding of Jerusalem's walls. Nehemiah finished those walls in 52 days during the summer of 444 BC. And now that the walls are finished, it is time to get everything back into place that's supposed to be there for the Jewish people to live as the people of God in their homeland, worshiping the God who was, is, and will always be. And so Nehemiah reports this in chapter number 7, verse number 5. Then my God put it into my heart to assemble the nobles, so this would be kind of the leadership, and the officials and the people to be enrolled by genealogy. And I found the book of the genealogy of those who came up at the first, and I found written in it, and then we have a summary of what he found. So right now, Nehemiah is living about 91, 92 years after the first Jewish return from Babylonian exile to the Jewish homeland. That happened under a man named Zerubbabel and his partner, the high priest Joshua. And they had a genealogical record of all of those that had come back with them. And you can actually see this record in the book of Ezra, chapter number 2. Here, we have a repeat of that list. Now, Nehemiah is going to do his own updated census, but he doesn't put that into the record for us. All he does is say, this is the starting point from 90-some years earlier. When we go through this list, and we're not going to go through it in detail, you can do this on your own. In fact, I felt that it was much more useful for our Western way of tackling topics to turn this and the Ezra 2 list into a chart that can then be skimmed over very quickly. But what you'll see in this is a list of the people tied into their genealogical background sometimes. Other times it's the town that their family was originally from before that family went into exile. And so that's the town that they're trying to return to. And other times it'll have something to do with their job. And so go through the list and you'll see the numbers. By the way, the numbers and names are some of the hardest things to hand copy. So you will see slight spelling differences between the Ezra list and the Nehemiah list. You will also see, in some instances, slight differences in the numbers. We've talked about this issue that we believe in the inspiration of the original document. But those documents, even though they are very carefully copied, sometimes suffer from human error. If you don't believe me how easy that is, just try to copy this list and see whether or not you get it perfectly 100% correct. Chances are you won't. But we have more than one list, which means we are aware that there's slight variations. And sometimes we understand how those variations got in there. There's also sometimes the rounding up or rounding down, the general estimation of a number. We do that in our own society. They did it back in their time. But you go through the early list, and then verse 39, you get to the priests. Verse 43, you get to the Levites. Verse 46, you get to the temple servants. Then you get to verse 57, and it talks about Solomon's servants. And then verse 60, all the temple servants and the sons of Solomon's servants were 392. So sometimes you have sub-lists that are then totaled out. Then you have some people that are historically significant. We have here mention of the following. This is verse 61. Were those who came up from Tel Milah, Tel Harsha, Kerub, Adon, and Emir. Those are all places up in Mesopotamia. But they could not provide their fathers' houses, prove their fathers' houses, nor their descent, whether they belonged to Israel. So somehow these guys had lost the records of their genealogy. They had kind of an understanding that they were Israelis, and they had some of their genetic lists, but not a complete one. And then verse 63, also of the priests, the sons of Hobaiah, the sons of Hakkoz, the sons of Barzillai, who had taken a wife of the daughters of Barzillai the Gileadite, and was called by their name. Barzillai was a compatriot of David. Actually, he was much older than David and supported David. And apparently, somebody from the priests had married into that Barzillai family and had taken on the name in order to kind of keep that family line going. But they've got the same problem. They can't prove their priestly genealogy. These sought their registration among those enrolled in the genealogies, but it was not found there. So they were excluded from the priesthood as unclean. Now, it's not that they're filthy dirty. It's the idea that they are not official. That's what's meant by the word unclean in this context. They cannot serve as priests, even though they feel that they are descendants of the priests. They can't prove it, so they're not allowed to serve. Until something might happen. Verse 61, the governor, back at the time that would have been Zerubbabel, told them that they were not to partake of the most holy food until a priest with the Urim and the Thummim should arise. Now the Urim and the Thummim, those were the two special stones that were in the pocket behind the chest piece of the high priest's uniform. We don't know where those went during the exile period. They apparently had not yet been found at the time of the time of Zerubbabel. But the hope was that once they were found, a high priest would be able to solve this problem and say, yes, this person is an authentic priest and may serve. Verse number 66. Now we come up with the totals. The whole assembly together was 42,360. So that's how many, probably heads of houses is what we're talking about, named persons came back. Besides their male and female servants, of whom there were 7,337, and then 245 singers, male and female. Their horses were 736, their mules 245, their camels 435, their donkeys 6,720. So we have a very, very complete accounting of that first group of Israelis coming back under the decree of Cyrus, under the leadership of Zerubbabel and Joshua the high priest. And that's how the population of Judea started growing again. By Zerubbabel's, by the time that Nehemiah comes on the scene, we've probably got even more tens of thousands to add to that. So I wouldn't be a bit surprised to find that the population was well into the 100,000 plus in the time of Nehemiah. And then there was the accounting of a whole bunch of gifts and money that was given. We're not going to go into the specifics of these. It's just millions, tens of millions of dollars worth of silver and gold, as well as priestly garments. And that's what got everyone started back in Zerubbabel and Joshua's day. And then Ezra comes later, brings a few more people, brings more supplies, brings more money. And then now Nehemiah has arrived about 91, 92 years after Zerubbabel and brought even more. and we're able to really get the Jewish society up and running again. Now, verse 73, I believe, brings us back to where we've been studying in time. That is Nehemiah's time. Verse 73, so the priests, the Levites, the gatekeepers, the singers, some of the people, the temple servants, and all Israel lived in their towns. We've got the population scattered around Jerusalem, within a day's walk or so of Jerusalem. Jerusalem itself is poorly populated. It's been walled in now, thanks to Nehemiah, but it is very sparsely populated, probably a few hundred people at the most. Some of the outlying cities have much more, a couple of thousand or more in some of those cities. But every festival time, the Jewish people are supposed to show up at Jerusalem to commemorate the feasts. And the temple has now been rebuilt, and the people are supposed to be coming back on a regular basis. But this particular year, 444 BC, they have a special reason to show up in the seventh month, the month of the bringing in of the tithe, because it is going to be the time to rededicate the entire city of Jerusalem and to dedicate the walls and to start bringing people in from the outlying areas into the city itself. Because as the book of Daniel and other prophecies have indicated, the city of Jerusalem is going to be fully populated and active whenever the Messiah comes up. So we've got to get ready for the Messiah. So verse 73, second half, when the seventh month had come, the people of Israel were in their towns. And then chapter 8 is the continuation of that. And all the people gathered as one man into the square before the water gate. So they come to Jerusalem in time for the Feast of Trumpets, which is the first day of the seventh month. Now, in this particular year, the first day of the seventh month fell on a Sabbath day toward the end of September. And so they have set this day aside for special functions, for the dedication of the wall and the reading of the law as prescribed by Moses the prophet, because this is also the kickoff for the 139th sabbatical year. And Moses said that the law was to be read aloud to the people at the beginning of every sabbatical year. So every 7 years, the people would gather in the seventh month, and they would have, I think, the entirety of the 5 books of Moses read aloud to them. I can guarantee you that it is at least the book of Deuteronomy, because Moses made that specific requirement in the book of Deuteronomy. At this point, I want us to go into the back of the book, chapter number 12, verse 27, because this is the part that describes the dedication ceremony. And based on the information of what happens with Ezra reading the law on the first day of the month in the morning, I am guessing that they scheduled the dedication of the wall to happen at the very first breaking of dawn. And then they were to all meet after the parade we're about to describe in the plaza between the east gate and the temple building itself for the morning worship service. That is the mid-morning offering of the sin sacrifice and the offering of the incense and the prayer time. So this, more than likely, that we're about to read, takes place right as the sun is rising. Nehemiah chapter 12, verse 27. At the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem, they sought the Levites in all their places to bring them to Jerusalem to celebrate the dedication with gladness, with thanksgiving, with singing, with cymbals, harps, and lyres. So the Levites are the support personnel that help do all of the logistical background work for the priests. Keep the fires going and the ashes removed and the clothes cleaned and mended and the junk taken out, the animals cared for until they become sacrifices. But they also provide the ambiance for the temple by playing musical instruments throughout the day and night and singing certain songs at certain times while they're standing on the steps of the temple and in the temple courts. And so the call goes out after the wall is finished. We need all Levites, especially those that are skilled in the musical things. Everybody, make sure you're in Jerusalem in time for the dedication ceremony. Verse 28, the sons of the singers gathered together from the district surrounding Jerusalem and from the villages of the Netophathites, also from Beth Gilgal and from the region of Geba and Asmaveth. These are places just north of Jerusalem where there were a lot of Levites living. For the singers had built for themselves villages around Jerusalem. And the priests and the Levites purified themselves, and they purified the people and the gates and the wall. So they went through the ceremonies that would dedicate themselves, the people, and the material of the wall, especially this being the first time that these gates and walls will be surrounding people for the 7th month celebrations. Verse 31. Then remember this is Nehemiah telling the story. Then I brought the leaders of Judah up onto the wall and appointed 2 great choirs to give thanks. One went to the south on the wall to the dung gate, and then we'll find out that the other one goes north on the wall toward the Tower of the Ovens. Now that identifies the starting point as the Valley Gate. Now, when we were talking about the building of the walls, I tried to do some personal identification of where the gates of Nehemiah must have been. And so the Valley Gate is on the west side of the city of Jerusalem that has now been re-walled in. Now, the city of Jerusalem consists of 2 components for our purposes. There is the ancient city of David, which is to the south. It's the oval-shaped hill. It's about 1/10 of a mile north to south and not very wide. I can't remember the exact width. But it was the ancient city of Jebus, or Salem. It is the place that David reigned from during his life. But north of there, Solomon built the temple, exactly where the Dome of the Rock, Golden Dome, is located today. That seems to be the temple site. That's where Solomon built the temple with its worship courtyard in front of it to the east, and then apparently some colonnades along what is now the area just south of the Eastern Gate, so-called, the Golden Gate. It's not authentic to Solomon's time or even the time of Jesus. But in that area just to the south, that's where the court was terminated in Solomon's day. And then south of that worship area that Solomon built was Solomon's palace complex, the area that we now call the Southern Temple Mount. that's where Solomon's palace and administrative complexes were located. They were totally annihilated by the Babylonians, nothing left. And so when Zerubbabel and Nehemiah and Ezra and all these colleagues come back, they are focused on two places. They're focused on the ancient city of David to the south, and then the worship area around the temple on the north. And then the place in between is just kind of a connecting area called the Ophel, or the hill. Now, the Valley Gate is on the western end of a connecting area between these two ancient sites. On the eastern side of this connecting area is the Water Gate. And so this is the place that's actually a road now between the Temple Mount and the city of David. But Nehemiah decides to start the celebrations on the western wall at the Valley Gate. And his first choir, with singing and playing of instruments, is going to parade along the wall around the south area, around the ancient city of David, and they will end up eventually in the worship plaza in front of the temple. The other choir will go north along the wall and around the north side of the Temple Mount, and they too will end up in front of the worship area. And I think the southern choir is going to have a little bit farther to go, but the full circuit is something in the neighborhood of about 2 miles. So it's not going to take much more than an hour for this parade to take place, and I believe it starts sometime shortly after the sun comes up. Now let's get into the details of the choirs. The first one is being still described in verse 32. After them, that is, in the choir, went Hoshea and half of the leaders of Judah, and Azariah, Ezra, Meshullam, Judah, Benjamin, Shemaiah, and Jeremiah, and certain of the priests' sons with trumpets. And then you got a whole bunch of names of people involved in that. And then others in verse 36 with musical instruments of David, the man of God. So they've got some of the instruments designed by David. Some of these instruments are hundreds of years old now. And then Ezra the scribe went before them, because he's a big, important person in the events of today. Because once they get done with the dedication, once they get done with the morning worship, Ezra is going to start reading from the law in accordance with Moses' directives. So Ezra the scribe went before this southern route parade. At the fountain gate, they went up straight before them by the stairs of the city of David at the ascent of the wall above the house of David to the water gate on the east. Now, what this describes is they just basically left the valley gate in the center of the western side. They went along the wall on the top of it, around the southern end of the city of David, down by the fountain gate, which is the pool of Siloam area. We know exactly where that's at. And then they went up the eastern side of the wall, past the palace that belonged to David in the years that he was there, and then up to the water gate. And then there's every expectation that they continued from there all the way along the wall until they arrived at the eastern gate, directly east from the temple. Now, verse 38 says, the other choir of those who gave thanks went to the north, and I followed them with half of the people on the wall. So Ezra's with the southern group. Nehemiah is going with the northern group. And so he went above the Tower of the Ovens to the broad wall. So he's heading north, we know that. The broad wall, probably the broad wall of Hezekiah. We know where a section of that is on the west side. And so some of that must have come fairly close to the western city, or the city components immediately west of the temple worship area. And then above the gate of Ephraim and by the gate of Yeshana, we didn't have the gate of Ephraim mentioned in the building process, but apparently it's on the northwest corner of this Jerusalem walled in by Nehemiah. We know the gate of Yeshana is up on the north side. And then by the fish gate, which I think might be directly north of the temple, and then the Tower of Hananel and the Tower of the 100, and to the sheep gate, which we know exactly the neighborhood that's in, because the sheep gate is mentioned in John chapter 5 as being near the pool of Bethesda. And we know where the ruins of Bethesda are. So we're now talking about the northeast corner of the modern Temple Mount. And then they came to a halt at the gate of the guard. This gate was known as the gate of muster, or the gate of assembly. It's on the northeast corner, on the eastern wall of the Temple Mount in Nehemiah's day, which means then the next stop after that would be the eastern gate. So both choirs have now arrived in the region of the worship area. And so both choirs of those who gave thanks stood in the house of God, I and half of the officials with me. And then those officials are named. And the singers sang with Jezariah, their leader, and they offered great sacrifices that day, and they rejoiced, for God had made them rejoice with great joy. The women, the children also rejoiced, and the joy of Jerusalem was heard far away. And that's the dedication of the wall.